Who do you blame in this situation?
Her family calls it a tragic accident. They say the arrest is only pouring salt on their wounds.
Chloe Wiegand fell and died after he lifted her up to an open window on the ship.
And I was just in disbelief. I was like, oh my gosh.
But the family's attorney says the cruise line isn't being truthful.
And I think really since day one they've been telling a false narrative to try to point the finger at Sam. And for me, in a lot of ways, it's more of a cause than a case.
Hello. A few years ago I came across a story about an American toddler who was held up to an open window on a cruise ship and was accidentally dropped 11 floors to the concrete pier below. This video isn't so much about that tragic accident as it is about the aftermath. A heated battle in court and in the media, assigning and denying blame and shame. What happened to Chloe Wiegand, and who is responsible for her death? First, it's worth mentioning that the cruise industry is rife with problems. They're polluting, bad for wildlife, notorious for abusing their workers, and they're not exactly known for safety. In fact, the industry has a long, sordid history of malfeasance, and is no stranger to lawsuits, like the infamous Poop Cruise in 2013, because the word feces is beyond our knowledge. That was when Carnival's Triumph experienced a fire in the engine room due to faulty maintenance, causing the ship to lose power. For 4 days, the ship drifted at sea in the Gulf of Mexico without electricity, air conditioning, or functional plumbing, forcing over 3,000 passengers and 1,000 crew members to, among other things, defecate in plastic bags and store them in the hallways. Now I mention this because 100 passengers sued the company, but Carnival asserted in court that the ticket contract signed by passengers makes absolutely no guarantee for safe passage, a seaworthy vessel, adequate and wholesome food, and sanitary and safe living conditions. The passengers' lawsuit was ultimately thrown out for technical reasons. So there are many reasons to criticize the cruise industry generally, but this case, in my opinion, is unique. So let's get into it. On July the 7th, 2019, the Wiegand family from Granger, Indiana, were about to embark on a 7-day cruise on Royal Caribbean's Freedom of the Seas, beginning in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The family included Alan Wiegand, a police officer, Kimberly Schultz Wiegand, a prosecutor, their 10-year-old son, and their 1.5-year-old daughter, Chloe. Joining them on the trip were Alan Wiegand's parents, as well as Kimberly Schultz Wiegand's mother, Patricia, and her husband, Kimberly's stepfather, Salvatore Sam Anello. The family boarded the ship, which was docked at the Pan American Pier in San Juan, at approximately 1:15 p.m. The ship was scheduled to depart that night at 8:30. After boarding, the family went to lunch at the Windjammer Cafe on the 11th deck. Afterward, at about 2:40 p.m., Kimberly Schultz Wiegand took baby Chloe to play in the water park on deck 11, called the H2O Zone. Here, the last ever photo of Chloe Wiegand alive was taken. At about 3:50 p.m., Schultz Wiegand had to leave the H2O zone to deal with an unspecified issue relating to the cruise. The nature of this has never been made clear, but it was likely banal. At this point, Kimberly's stepfather, Anello, was asked to stay and supervise Chloe in the H2O zone. About 10 minutes later, Anello and Chloe left the H2O zone and walked to an adjoining seating area next to a long bank of windows. What exactly happened next and why is a serious point of contention in the case. We'll get to that. What isn't disputed is that Anello picked up Chloe, lifted her over a chest-high safety railing, and placed her in an open window, with her feet on the window's frame or the railing. That detail is still disputed. After about 30 seconds, Anello lost his grip on Chloe, and she fell from the window, dropping 11 stories, or about 150 feet, to her death. At that distance, as you can imagine, the scene was undoubtedly horrendous. At 4:04 p.m., the ship's onboard doctor, Marcel Alexander Armand van Drunik, received a radio call about an accident. In a witness statement, Dr. van Drunik recalled, "About halfway down the pier we saw the body of a baby lying on the pier. It was a female, 18 months baby lying face down with multiple traumatic injuries. There was no life. Her one pink shoe and white hat was lying on the pier not far from the deceased. I immediately called for a sheet to cover the body." He then heard screams coming from the 11th deck and went up to see what happened. He described the scene on the 11th deck as chaos and said Anello was being escorted, that is, assisted on both sides from other people, crying and sobbing. At this time, the Wiegands arrived at the scene. In later deposition, the mother recalls looking out the window and seeing Chloe's body covered in a sheet on the pier. She began screaming at Anello, "You killed Chloe," to which he responded, "I know." Dr. van Drunik then accompanied Anello to the ship's infirmary. While riding down the elevator, Anello collapsed on the floor, sobbing, saying, "I dropped my baby, I dropped my baby." The doctor asked Anello what happened, to which he responded, crying, "I thought the window was closed." Anello and the doctor arrived at the infirmary, and the Wiegans arrived moments later. The doctor described them as emotionally traumatized, asking to see their child, but they were kept separated from Anello and the ER. The doctor offered the family a sedative, which the mother, Kimberly, accepted, but Anello refused. During this time, Anello was sitting in a chair in a wardroom, having calmed down but bursting into tears every time anyone spoke to him. Shortly after the incident, Puerto Rican police arrived at the scene to investigate, but did not interview the family at that time, describing them as still being in shock. The family said they would remain in Puerto Rico until the investigation was complete. By 8 p.m. that night, before the freedom of the seas had even departed, the Puerto Rican press began reporting on the incident. According to newspaper Primera Hora, the homicide division of the police department had been called to the scene, and a public security official, Elma Roman, told the paper, translated from Spanish, "At one point, one of her grandparents, apparently in an act of games, exposes the girl to the void, and she falls out of his hands." On July the 8th, one day after Chloe's death, news outlets across the United States began picking up the story with additional reporting. Puerto Rican Police Sergeant Nelson Sotelo told the Associated Press that Anello, specifically, was under investigation. Puerto Rico Ports Authority spokesman Jose Carmona told the AP that Anello had sat Chloe on the edge of an open window before she slipped from his hands. AOL reported that Anello had been playfully dangling the child from the window. Back in South Bend, Indiana, where Alan Wiegand worked as a police officer, Police Chief Scott Ruskowski issued a statement on behalf of the Wiegands, disputing that Anello held Chloe outside the open window. The question of whether she had been held outside of the window or perched on the edge of it would later become a major point of contention in the case. The South Bend Police Department also released a statement in support of the family on Twitter, which was retweeted by Pete Buttigieg, who, at that time, was the mayor of South Bend, as well as a presidential candidate. Needless to say, the story was gaining traction. That same day, the Wiegans retained Miami-based maritime attorney Michael Winkleman, who deals almost exclusively with cruise ship lawsuits. And to be clear, Florida has laws against ambulance chasing, which means the Wiegands would have had to contact Winkleman. They would not have been solicited by him. On July the 9th, 2 days after Chloe's death, the Wiegands attended a meeting with officials from Puerto Rico's Department of Justice, but, on advice from their attorney, refused to provide witness statements and left. That same day, Winkleman began speaking to media outlets about the incident. This is where the family side of the story began to take shape, and the media tour well and truly began. Speaking to NBC News, Winkleman described the incident as occurring in a children's play area that was enclosed with clear glass paneling.
Really, I think Royal Caribbean needs to answer this question is why would you ever, in a kid's play area, put windows that passengers can open?
These same elements of the story were repeated in multiple media outlets. A children's play area, a window inexplicably left open in what appeared to be a clear wall of glass with a hidden danger. Other elements were repeated too, such as there was no warning about the windows, and outlets referred to Anello as elderly. He was 51 at the time. Winkleman also shared photos of Chloe with the media, including several of her at hockey games. In addition, he shared photos of the windows on Deck 11, taken by Chloe's father after the incident, which were, notably, taken at night. The same day, the 9th, Winkleman gave a press conference in Miami, while the Wiegands were still in Puerto Rico awaiting the release of Chloe's body. Reporters in attendance seemed skeptical about what happened and asked some pertinent questions.
The windows on cruise ships are a problem?
Generally, windows on cruise ships are certainly not a problem. I think when you put them in a kids area where passengers can open them, that where they're in a wall of windows creates a hidden danger unless you warn about it.
I've been on this ship
Sure.
or ship similar, and they're waist high approximately
Yes.
for an adult.
Yeah.
And they do slide. That entire 11th floor does. The option is to slide.
Sure.
But aren't they also slightly tinted so you can see the difference? An adult
Sure.
should be able to notice the difference between a tinted window
Sure.
and it slid open.
Sure. I haven't had an opportunity to inspect the vessel yet, so I haven't seen that. I know the photos that I've seen, you basically see a wall of windows that look the identical color.
And 11 stories up, he couldn't tell that there wasn't glass less than one foot
Sure.
away from him?
The opportunity that I had to speak with Sam was having one of the harder conversations I've ever had as an attorney. He was literally telling me the story through tears, and he literally thought there was glass there. And he thought that she was going to bang on the glass like she was at a hockey game, like she loved to do with her brother.
On July the 11th, 4 days after Chloe's death, Chloe's body was released by authorities, and both the Wiegands and Anello left Puerto Rico. The authorities wanted them to remain in the country until the investigation was complete, but could not legally stop them from leaving, since no arrest had been made at that time. Later that day, the Wiegands and Anello arrived in Chicago on separate flights, and the South Bend Police Department provided a police escort for the family from O'Hare Airport in Chicago to their home in Granger, Indiana. That's no short distance. The police department also started a fundraiser for the Wiegands and raised over $20,000. A few days later, on July the 16th, the Wiegands held a memorial for Chloe, attended by lots of South Bend police officers in their official uniforms and public vehicles, along with city officials, as well as Mayor and presidential hopeful Pete Buttigieg. On July the 22nd, 2 weeks after Chloe's death, the Wiegands went on NBC's Today Show for a sit-down interview, where they recounted their experience, repeated the same talking points first used by Winkleman, and, for the first time, directly blamed Royal Caribbean for Chloe's death.
We have a lot of questions, primarily. Why is there an open window in the kids' play area 11 stories off the ground?
Do you blame anyone? Or... You blame the cruise company?
We obviously blame them. There are a million things that could have been done to make that safer. I know my mom was asking people, why on earth is there a window open on the 11th floor without a screen or anything? And their response to that was, we need ventilation. Well, to that I would say, get a fan, well, rather than creating a tremendous safety hazard that cost our child her life.
Would you like to see the cruise company held responsible in court?
I think that they have to be. This cannot happen to another family.
After this interview, the story lingered in the media, which was mostly sympathetic to the Wiegands, often repeating Winkleman's wording and even adding their own, referring to the window being inexplicably left open and referring to Anello as a doting grandfather who was elderly. Again, he was 51. However, nothing important really happened until about 3 months later, on October the 28th, 2019, when Salvatore Anello was charged with negligent homicide by the Puerto Rican authorities. If you don't know, negligent homicide essentially means you didn't kill her on purpose, but you did kill her as a result of your own negligent actions. Anello was given a court date on November the 20th in Puerto Rico and released on an $80,000 bond. Winkleman, of course, was commenting in the news media almost immediately, telling ABC News,
"Really, in a lot of ways, I think it's salt on the wounds of the family who are still grieving. Why are you going to charge him with a misdemeanor when you already know he's been through such a terrible trauma? Everybody on earth agrees this was an accident. Everybody knows there was no intent involved. And so it sort of begs the question, why?"
In addition, once again, the South Bend police, in my opinion, interfered with this investigation by releasing yet another public statement through the Fraternal Order of Police, saying, "The charges filed in Puerto Rico today are appalling and do nothing but re-victimize a family who experienced a horrific loss. Based on the facts, it sounds like the negligence in this tragedy came from the cruise ship, not the family. The South Bend FOP stands in support of Officer Alan Wiegand and his family and urges Puerto Rican authorities to drop these unnecessary charges." Anyway, I think now is a good time to briefly discuss Salvatore Anello. Does he have a prior criminal history? Well, looking at Indiana's public records, between 1996 and 2015, Anello had 5 separate tickets for failure to wear a seatbelt, a couple of charges for speeding, and a couple of civil cases. Is that a big deal? Probably not, but it may indicate that he isn't particularly interested in rules that exist primarily for the safety of himself or others. If he got a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt, on average, once every 4 years, those are just the times he got caught. So, Anello did have his first court date on November the 20th in Puerto Rico. We can't be sure what happened there, but we know that he was released on bond. By this time, Winkleman had received security footage from Royal Caribbean of the incident and began sharing it with media outlets all over America. But it was not at this time released to the public. Then, on November the 26th, Anello did a television interview on CBS This Morning, where he talked about his experience, in addition to making some specific statements that seemed to contradict the story presented by both the Puerto Rican authorities and Winkleman. First, CBS correspondent David Begnard tells us that he was shown clips of the security footage that wasn't accurate to the events.
We reported initially that it showed Anello and Chloe appearing to walk up to the railing, which looks similar to this one, and that Mr. Anello looked down out of the window for about a second, that he picked Chloe up and held her over the railing for about 5 seconds. Turns out it was longer. Attorney Winkleman says the video that he showed us was the same format that he received from prosecutors. In a statement, he told us any variation in time likely has to do with software issues. Most importantly, whether it was 5, 10, or 30 seconds does nothing to change the fact that Sam reasonably believed the window was closed.
So I, was trying to stand her on the railing, and It happened in seconds.
Like, was it kind of a bear hug, or was it?
Kind of, yeah. I was trying to hold her like that. And I think that's the point where she slipped out of me.
The video that CBS News saw, and I saw myself, appears to show you holding Chloe above the railing and over the railing. I have to think a juror who watches that may think that was reckless.
If there was some kind of warning sign there, we wouldn't have even been near it. We wouldn't have even been near it. I am colorblind, so that's been told me. That's something that...
You are colorblind?
I'm colorblind, Dave. I don't know. I just never saw it.
You blame the cruise line?
I do. It's hard to, yeah. I just want them to fix the boat. Just fix it. Just fix the boat.
Then, on the 11th of December, the Wiegands filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Royal Caribbean and held a press conference to announce it. The press conference was originally scheduled to take place at the South Bend Police Department, but was changed to the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge after a reporter from the South Bend Tribune asked why the event was taking place on city property. Even today, I can find no clear answer to that question.
At the outset, I would like to say that Royal Caribbean played a major role in the death of our child. There is no reason for this ship to have walls of glass surrounding the 11th floor with portions that open. If that condition did not exist, Chloe would still be here. We believe that filing a lawsuit against the cruise line sends a message to them that they were wrong. Most of all, we hope that this improves the safety of these ships for other children and other families. No other family should have to grieve the kind of loss we have to grieve. What purpose could possibly be served by prosecuting a misdemeanor offense? It continues to be a source of stress and anxiety for our entire family. And when we have already lost so much, what does this accomplish? Finally, I would like to say that I do not want the legacy of our little girl to be the history of court cases.
At the press conference, the Wiegands were interviewed by Inside Edition, where they reiterated their dismay at Anello being criminally charged. They were also interviewed by CBS This Morning, which aired the next day.
One of the things that disappoints me about all of it in losing Chloe is that I think when you Google her name, all you're going to see is things about court cases, and people really forget that this was a living, breathing human being.
There will be people who watch this who say, I don't understand why they're suing. What would you say?
Because Royal Caribbean played a major role in our daughter's death, and because that condition shouldn't have existed. I mean, we've said that since the beginning.
If they would have followed the safety codes and updated their ship, all their ships, then it never would have happened. She'd still be here today.
We want them to fix their cruise ship so that no other kids get hurt.
Wait a minute, Royal Caribbean wasn't following safety codes? As in, they broke the law? No. But we'll get to that very soon. For now, just keep in mind that Winkleman accused Royal Caribbean of violating safety codes, and that he went on to repeat this claim to other news outlets ad nauseum. But first, the bombshell. Just 5 days after filing the lawsuit and going on a press tour, on the 17th of December, the surveillance footage showing the incident was mysteriously leaked to La Come, a Puerto Rican gossip show hosted by this puppet. 2 camera angles are shown. From the first angle, we see Anello following Chloe from the H2O zone to a large column, where he squats down and appears to be watching her. If you look at the left-hand corner, you can see another passenger standing at an open window. After a moment, we can just see Chloe walking away toward the windows, and Anello stands and follows her. The other passenger appears to leave the open window. Anello walks over to the window and seems to lean on the railing, looking out for about 15 seconds. We then see him leaning down, then lifting Chloe up to the window. She appears to be seated on the railing. About 30 seconds later, we see him lift her up so she is standing. She appears to be leaning forward, arms outstretched. About 20 seconds after that, She falls, disappearing from view, and Anello drops to the floor. Other passengers begin rushing to the area to see what's happening. From the other angle, we see the same thing from the side. Anello approaches the window and leans over, picks up Chloe, places her in the window. We can't quite see him repositioning her from this angle. And then Anello drops to the floor. From what I can tell, this leaked footage had a major impact on the public opinion that Winkleman and the Wiegands had been working so hard to cultivate. A lot more people began turning against them. But the footage is grainy. Could there be more to the story? Well, yes, there is. But first, things are kind of a bit macabre, aren't they? So I think I need to take a bit of a break. Well, that's enough of that. So now is a good time to talk about the lawsuit and the specific allegations made in both court documents and the media. All of these documents were presented to Judge Donald L. Graham, who would decide whether the case should move on and get a jury trial or be dismissed. This court battle would go on for a year and a half, with dozens of motions and documents before reaching a conclusion. Some of the arguments and counter-arguments are actually pretty spicy, especially considering they come from corporate lawyers, but I'm just going to summarize the relevant arguments made. First, the assertion that the incident happened in a children's play area is misleading at best. Remember, it happened on Deck 11 of the ship. Here's a map of Deck 11, specifically as it looked in 2019. It's basically the pool deck of the ship. We see whirlpools, a sports pool, a pool bar, and the H2O Zone water park in the center of the ship, with multiple bars and restaurants on the outside. The H2O Zone is certainly a kids area. Bright colors, lots of kids playing. Notice the seating areas on either side of the park. Notice how the windows are tinted, and you can clearly tell, even at a distance, which ones are open and which ones are closed. Look at this little shack next to the seating area which says Squeeze. This is the exact area where the incident happened, as you can see in photos filed in the lawsuit. This area is certainly adjacent to the H2O Zone, but what exactly is Squeeze? Some kind of snack area for children? In the lawsuit photos, you can't tell what it is. But I found a better photo online. Oh, look at all these beverages for children. The incident didn't happen in a kids' play area, it happened in a bar located next to a kids' area. I guess she fell from a window in a bar just doesn't have quite the same ring to it. But it's really close to a kids' area, right? Well, it depends on your definition of close. Also, does it legally matter if it was a children's area? There are children all over the entire ship. They aren't confined to this water park. It could have happened on any part of the ship that contained windows. Winkleman and the Wiegands variously called these windows a clear wall of glass with a missing pane, a hidden hole, a hidden danger. Firstly, the windows are tinted a blue-green colour. Here are some photos. I bet you can tell which ones are open. It's interesting to note that photos of the windows included in the lawsuit are clearly all closed. But wait, Anello said he's colourblind, so maybe he couldn't see the window tint. Well, I'm no expert, obviously, but I took a look at some online colour blindness simulators. No matter which type of colour blindness you select, it's really obvious which windows are closed. Am I missing something here? Now let's assume that Anello couldn't see the window tint for some reason. Wouldn't he still be able to feel the sea breeze, smell the salt in the air, hear the sounds of the pier below, feel the difference in temperature between the full tropical sun of Puerto Rico in July versus the shaded interior? Surrounding this case is the recurring notion that there weren't any warnings that the windows could open. This is a key part of the lawsuit, alleging that Royal Caribbean had a duty to warn passengers of a known dangerous condition. The lawsuit says there was not a single adequate indication that the wall of glass panes was not actually a wall of fixed glass panes. For instance, none of the glass panes, which were mere feet from the kids' H2O zone, contained a warning, design decal on the glass, or anything to warn passengers, such as Mr. Anello, on the hidden danger that some of the glass pane windows in the middle row may be slid open. The complaint goes further by claiming that the safety railing in front of the window was 18 inches away from the glass, and because of this distance, Anello couldn't tell the window was open. Is the safety rail itself a warning, or is it a baby chair? Do the Wiegands really want a sticker on every window slapped with a "Warning, this window is a window" sticker? Perhaps when windows are open, there should be a little man waving a red flag nearby, and constant deck warnings that windows exist. Their argument is absurd. And let's say there were signs on the windows warning of the danger. You mean like the signs on the road that tell you the speed limit? The indicator on your car dashboard reminding you to put your seatbelt on? If there had been a warning, do you think Anello would have abided by it, considering his history of ignoring such signs while driving a 4,000-pound missile down the road? Also, the Royal Caribbean Guest Health Safety and Conduct Policy, which must be signed by passengers when purchasing a ticket, explicitly prohibits passengers from sitting, standing, jumping, laying, or climbing on, over, or across any exterior or interior railings or other protective barriers. Is that not a warning? I also have to wonder whether Anello had attended the mandatory muster drill on the ship, a safety meeting that all passengers are required to attend before embarking, where you're instructed on basic safety protocols, including warnings to never stand or climb on railings, and to keep children, specifically, away from all railings on the ship. Were none of these things adequate warnings? You need a sticker on every window, every railing, every balcony. From early on, Winkleman accused Royal Caribbean of violating safety codes, standards, and laws designed for cruise ships. This claim is repeated in the lawsuit as well, specifically saying the ship violated standards set forth by the American Society for Testing and Materials. Furthermore, it states that 4,700 children per year are injured in the United States alone from falling out of windows. But it turns out all of that is pretty irrelevant. Firstly, the ASTM standards are guidelines, not laws. Secondly, they apply only to windows installed more than 75 feet or higher in multiple family dwelling units, apartment buildings. They do not apply to cruise ships and are not used as a standard in the cruise ship industry in any way whatsoever. And those stats of about 4,500 children injured each year from falling out of windows, those are kids falling from windows in their homes. According to Royal Caribbean, in the entire history of the cruise ship industry, there has never been a case of a child falling from a cruise ship window as a result of someone lifting them into it. I did a little searching, and I couldn't find such a case either before this one. The judge in the civil suit noted that Winkleman couldn't cite any cases either. And that's it in terms of the major assertions made in the lawsuit about why Chloe's death was the fault of Royal Caribbean rather than Anello. But there were some other weird tidbits along the way. For example, at one point Winkleman accused Royal Caribbean of not handing over all of the video evidence, saying that when Winkleman's team did a ship inspection, they found 13 additional cameras in the area of the incident. And yes, of course, he repeated this to the media. Royal Caribbean responded to this allegation by pointing out that, of those 13 additional cameras, 2 of them were actually speakers, not cameras. The remaining 11 cameras were all over Deck 11 and didn't capture the incident. Winkleman claimed that Royal Caribbean had destroyed evidence that would have exonerated Anello. Again, he said this to the media as well. In fact, Winkleman had requested surveillance footage for 12 hours prior to the incident in order to find out who opened the window. Was it another passenger? Was it an employee? Was it the Babadook? Will that in any way change anything? The windows can be opened by absolutely anyone. Anyway, Royal Caribbean hadn't saved this footage of the previous 12 hours, arguing it was irrelevant. The judge apparently agreed. When Winkleman and his team performed their inspection of the ship, they took a lot of photos, including a reenactment of the incident, using a man of similar height and stature to Anello, and they included these photos in one of their court filings as evidence that Royal Caribbean was deceptive in their description of events. First, Winkleman claims that the surveillance footage was deceptive because it doesn't show that there was a gap in between the safety railing and the window, which they claim made it more difficult for Anello to see that the window was open. Second, in Royal Caribbean's initial response to the complaint, they asserted that Anello knew perfectly well that the window was open because he leaned on the railing and stuck his head out of it before picking up Chloe. So Winkleman submitted these reenactment photos showing that it would have been physically impossible for Anello to stick his head out of the window. And here's the thing with that. Whether he stuck his head out of the window is not really important, because in Anello's interview on CBS, he said that, while holding Chloe, he reached out to bang on the glass but couldn't reach it, so he leaned her forward. Look at this photo. How could he not reach it with his hand? The railing is 19 inches away from the window. According to his mugshot, Anello is 5 feet 11 inches tall. I'm 5'7" and 11/12. My arm measures 29 inches from shoulder to fingertips. Presumably, his arms are longer than mine. Then again, the mugshot also says he weighs 275 pounds, so who knows? These photos prove nothing except how incredibly dangerous it is to put a child in this position. Look at that gap between the railing and the window. Even if the window had been closed when he dropped her, she easily could have been injured or even killed by falling down that gap to the floor below. But, of course, Winkleman shared some of these photos with media outlets and claimed it was evidence that Royal Caribbean's version of events was impossible. There are many contradictions in the Wiegand's and Anello's assertions, and a lot of unanswered questions. Why did Winkleman say that there weren't any witnesses to this event, when the Puerto Rican prosecutors, in addition to Winkleman's own court filings, confirmed that several people witnessed what happened? Why did Winkleman tell the media, and write in the lawsuit, that Chloe herself asked to be lifted to the window so she could bang on the glass, when Anello said in his interview that he decided to do it? Why is it that when asked about whether Anello had been drinking, Winkleman told the media, "There was absolutely no alcohol involved. Sam is not a drinker"? To me, that statement seems intentionally vague, especially as this happened in a bar. Whether Anello was drinking, or was breathalyzed, or offered a breathalyzer after he dropped Chloe to her death, is unclear. Now, you may be wondering at this point, what happened with Anello's criminal case in Puerto Rico? Well, in October of 2020, he took a plea deal on the charge of negligent homicide. After pleading guilty, Anello released a public statement explaining that he decided to take the plea deal to try and end part of this nightmare for my family. In the end, he was sentenced to 3 years of probation, which he could serve back in Indiana instead of Puerto Rico. Anello was sentenced in February of 2021, but the Wiegands continued with their civil lawsuit. Then, in July of that year, the judge made his final ruling and dismissed the lawsuit against Royal Caribbean. In the ruling, Judge Graham determined that Royal Caribbean had no notice of the risk-creating danger on the cruise ship, and that the true risk-creating danger here was Mr. Anello lifting a child up to an open window. He goes on to say that the danger of lifting a child over the hand railing and into an open window was open and obvious, and that Royal Caribbean could not foresee Anello's conduct, and therefore had no duty to warn passengers of this obvious danger. Having been through all of the available court documents, all of the interviews and depositions, the video evidence, and dozens of media reports and articles, here's what I think happened. I think Anello did know the window was open. I think he walked to the one open window specifically because it was open. I think he put Chloe in the window because he thought it would be fun for her, looking over the pier from so high up. I think he lost his grip on her. She had just been playing in the water park. She was probably wet. I have no doubt he never considered the fact she could slip, and I have no doubt he regrets it and will regret it for the rest of his life. The truth is, people do dangerous, reckless things all the time, and very often they completely get away with it unharmed. But sometimes they don't. People put themselves in danger, like jumping over safety railings at national parks before falling over a cliff. People put their own children in danger, like sitting them on safety railings. Why did the Wiegands sue the cruise line over this? I don't believe it was greed, though I'm sure millions of dollars would have helped ease the pain. In my opinion, what happened to Chloe was so painful, so horrific, that the parents psychologically had to blame somebody. But the parents were a prosecutor and a police officer. I think that they probably felt, for most of their professional lives, if not morally superior, then morally safe. But if they blamed Anello, it would tear their family apart. All the happy memories of him with Chloe would be tainted, and they themselves would have to bear some responsibility and some guilt over having left Chloe in his care. I think it's much easier to blame the big, faceless, evil corporation with lots of money, and Royal Caribbean is that, but I don't think they could possibly be held responsible for Chloe's death. The fault lies with Anello and him alone. Of course, the story is not finished. The Wiegands appealed Judge Graham's ruling, and in July of 2023, the appeal was approved. According to the appeals court, they were required to view this case in the most favourable light for the plaintiffs, the Wiegands. And according to them, the fact that there was a safety railing in front of the window, and the fact that Royal Caribbean forbids guests from climbing over railings, could possibly, maybe, convince a juror that Royal Caribbean knew these windows were dangerous. So, the case continues. And so, we may get a jury trial out of this after all. I, for one, would be very interested to see what a jury makes of it. And there you go. R.I.P. Chloe. Thanks very much for watching. You can support me and my channel on Patreon or PayPal. And remember, accidents don't happen to you until they do. So, stay safe out there, y'all. Bye-bye.